connection between the birth of jazz and Charleston? Well, while most people talk about New Orleans being the birthplace of jazz, it's really kind of hard to pinpoint the birthplace of that music in being one place. We believe in our research, I say we, and musicians that are historians here in the low country of Charleston, South Carolina, we believe that the music was going on the same time between New Orleans, between Charleston, between Savannah, and all of these other towns and cities. We kind of label them and call them cradles of jazz, per se. If you look at it, they all have striking similarities. Speaking of those three that I mentioned, Charleston and New Orleans and Savannah, they're all port cities. They all have similar architecture. They all seem to have a French Quarter. If you were to, visit any of those cities, you would see a lot of the same things that were strikingly, the same. It's all about cuisine, and so a lot of the entertainment, during those times in the mid to late 1800s and into the 1900s, where people believe that jazz officially started. A lot of the things that were happening in those towns were the same. And if you think about the true meaning of jazz, you basically have improvisation on simple, songs or tunes or spoken word even. And so it's just really hard to pinpoint to say this place concretely, was the beginning of jazz. Although some people, and maybe I'm just being a little biased, but some people have gone so far to say that their research still says that Charleston did it first. But that's a little picky. The Jenkins Orphanage Jazz Band is extremely important to the music. We point to Jenkins as being within the cradle of jazz. It's definitely a place where the advancement of the music had quite an impact on the rest of the world. Reverend Daniel Jenkins was this pastor here in Charleston, and he basically stumbled across these boys that were living in an old abandoned train boxcar. And to make a long story short, he sort of brought them to his church, and the members of the church sort of helped them out with clothes and stuff, just like a lot of churches do. And make a long story short, he asked the city to help him financially to open this orphanage in order to give, African American, kids that didn't have a place to go, some place to be. And so the Jenkins Orphanage was established. And one of the things that he did was he incorporated a music class. He had other things that you could learn how to do, like simple carpentry and, things like that, plumbing or whatever have you. But he had this music class, and in this music class, he brought in these two gentlemen who had just graduated from Avery Normal Institute, and they basically taught the residents of the orphanage how to play. They taught them how to read music, which is extremely important, and they started to do simple improvisations on the music that they would be reading, which at that time, the usual was for them to play military marches. And so they would go out on the streets of Charleston with permission from the city, and they would stand on the corner and they would start to play these songs, these military marches. However, they would do these simple improvisations, a thing in the jazz what we call ragging the music. And so it began to just be very popular because they were so good at doing it. And word started to spread about this little band of orphans from Charleston, and they started to play in friendly towns in the state of South Carolina. Word started to spread. They started to go through the southeastern part of the United States. Word started to spread. They started going up and down the East Coast. Word spread really far. The Queen of England heard about them and sponsored them on a European tour. And from this band, you had all of these people that started to go out and be major contributors to other people, whether it was Duke Ellington, whether it was Count Basie, whether it was Lionel Hampton, you know, just so many different things. There's even a connection to Ella Fitzgerald, you know, from all of this. And so we point to the Jenkins Orphanage as being a significant contributor to the music because the reputation of the band had gotten so good that people started sending their kids to the orphanage, you know, to take music lessons, not to stay, but to take music lessons. And it was just known that if you came from the Jenkins Orphanage band, you were going to be a solid musician. It's kind of an unwritten rule that Duke Ellington had, that he was going to have a musician in his band at all times from Charleston or from New Orleans. And through research, we've counted up into the teens of the people from Charleston or with a connection to Charleston that you know, came from Jenkins Orphanage. So Jenkins is extremely important with regards to just jazz in general. Charleston has some amazing jazz musicians. Two people that really stick out are guitarist Freddie Green and drummer Rufus Speedy, that's his nickname, Jones. Both of them had legendary careers. Rufus, let's start with Rufus. Rufus was one of the most prolific, technically sound drummers ever. He made his name known by playing with the Count Basie Orchestra and the Duke Ellington Orchestra. He was, I want to say he was, if he wasn't the last, he was the next to last drummer that recorded, you know, with Duke Ellington before Duke passed. But he had had a tremendous career spanning a number of years with those two fine, you know, jazz orchestras, legendary orchestras. Freddie Green was a guitarist. Freddie Green, in most people's book, is regarded as the greatest rhythm guitarist of all time. He played with the Count Basie Orchestra. Actually, he was born here in Charleston, in a little part of Charleston we call Back to Green. Freddie Green from Back to Green. He, as a young boy, he took lessons at Jenkins Orphanage. He wasn't an orphan, but he went over for the class and took lessons like a lot of people did. He then, and I'm speeding it up a little bit, but he basically hooked up with Count Basie in that orchestra. And with the exception of just a short period of time, he basically was the rhythm guitarist for the Count Basie Orchestra for the next 49 years. And that's job security if you're, you know, holding it down. Freddie Green, he never took a solo. He never played with an amplifier. He never played moving lines. He just played the chord, just chuck, 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 whether it was a fast song or a slow song. The Count Basie Orchestra was famous for its rhythm section. Its guitar, piano, bass, and drums. They called them the All-American Rhythm Section. And Count Basie has gone on record as saying that you know, Freddie Green was the glue that held all of that together. And he famously also said, if Freddie decides to leave my band, I'm going with him. Now, I mean, I don't know how much more of a compliment you can get from Count Basie, you know, as to that. So with regards to Charleston musicians, for me, there's quite a few, but those two stick out, Freddie Green and Rufus Jones.